What's up, my logical listeners? This is Adam the DJ Dude, aka Groove Logic, here with another episode of the iPad Music Series. So, tonight I am going to be talking about Native Instruments Traktor DJ for the iPad. This application has some really cool functionality. I've been using it for a long time. I use it really strictly for like electronic music and some like instrumental hip hop and that kind of thing. It does have a couple of cons to it. More pros than cons. But the cons are actually what I'm going to talk about first. The two cons that I have, one is the lack thereof of pitch control. This application relies heavily on a built-in sync and analytic engine that it has. It analyzes the tracks and it does this whole sync beat matching thing for you. You do have, so you can turn your sync on. It syncs each track together. You do have a little bit of control, so this is very similar to like the Warp engine in Ableton Live. It's very similar to that. Not as much work, but it's very similar. If you've ever used that, it's basically you're having to kind of set your bar markers and that kind of thing. You can change it from half time to double time, but other than that, you're basically setting the tempo of the overall set. Now you can change, the BPM or, just work with it with the sync engine turned off, but it's kind of awkward. That's only if I'm, really going from like drum and bass to dubstep or something like that, which I don't really do that often. But when I'm using this application, I use this really for like my hour-long DJ mixes that I do on Groove Logic Radio Network on Mixcloud, which you can find on, you can go through groovelogic.audio, or just go search it on Mixcloud. Also on Groove Logic Audio, you can get some cool new merch that we've got up there, so go check that out. Anyway, enough with the plugging, back with this program. I use this program in conjunction with a mixer called the Traktor Z1. This is a proprietary little audio interface mixer. The mixer controls only work with Traktor, either on the computer or on the iPad. Other than that, it does act as an audio interface for my iPad when I've just got it sitting up here plugged in. So any other application that I use, the sound does go through this and into my mixer. The main works as channel 1 and 2, and then the Q is channel 3 and 4. So I actually plug the RCAs from here into channel 2 on my mixer, and then the Q actually goes into channel 3, which I keep the volume turned down and the Q turned on, so I can still do my Q selecting from here, but running everything through my DJ mixer, because I also have my little scratch turntables that I have plugged in too, so I want to be able to cue it all up and not have to switch headphones around. But that little combination, that Traktor Z1 mixer and the iPad, is a great little mobile setup. I've used it in clubs all over the place for EDM sets and that kind of thing. Because of the lack of pitch control, it's hard to use it in situations like, say, a wedding or something like that, to where you may be going from a high energy track to like a slow song ballad, and it's kind of hard to make that transition with this program. On that note, the second con to this application, in my personal opinion, is the lack of options for music selection. It only allows you to use what's in the music app on the iPad. I think that's a fail. Come on, Native Instruments, you're better than this. Let's update this application to be able to use the Files app, just like every other DJ application has updated. I'm not sure if they're doing a whole lot of work with this application. The interface has really stayed the same since I've had the app, which has been like 4 years. It has added some features into it. There is an add-in called the Super Slicer, which is really cool. They added that in later on. That's where you can basically take a loop and then freeze it, and you have all these different slice and cut options on a loop, which is really cool. That makes for some really fun mixing. And they've also improved the loop functionality. You can go way down on your loops to where you're, basically go down to where you're playing like a 1/32, I think is what it goes down to. But yeah, that's pretty cool. And then you can go all the way up to a 32 bar loop. So the loop functionality is really fun to play with on this. When you're not using it in the in the freeze function, it just loops normally. But when you're using it in the freeze function, you can slice it up. I like using the little scratch functionality that you can play with. When you go up top, it's like a break. This does like a regular like a baby scratch, and then this is a reverse. You've got a 1/3 cut, a half, and then a full slice. And then you've got pitch up, pitch down, and slice. So you can pitch it up real quick. You can slow it down real quick. It's like that. This makes for some really fun mixing. So anyway, I got a little sidetrack on that. The loop functionality is definitely a pro. So back on that last con, because I don't want to leave that. Other programs like DJ Pro, even the Cross DJ application that I use with the Gemini Mix to Go, they have access to like Spotify and Deezer and stuff like that. So if you have a subscription with those programs, you can actually DJ the music from those applications, which is from those services, which is really cool. Traktor doesn't give you that. It only gives you what's in the music app. Yeah, I want to be able to access files on my Dropbox and that kind of thing. I don't want to have to plug in my iPad to my computer every time to use music in this. I want to be able to just pull it from any of my sources. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So I did talk about the loop engine. I showed you that real quick. That's definitely a pro because I like using the loop functionality. The second biggest function that I use is the cue point functionality, which for loops you can set a loop as a cue point, which is really cool. Like I set this right here so that if you got a track that's running long or something like that, you can set a cue point for a loop. Or if you just like a certain part of a song that you want to cut up, you can use loops and set cue points and jump to those different loops. So what I do is, because of the way that I play my electronic sets, is I usually will set like a cue point at the front of the track. I'll set it, like at the start of like a main melody or a main vocal, and then I'll set a cue point at the at the drop, and then I'll set occasionally I'll set some other little loop points. It just depends on the tracks and it depends on how I'm mixing them. So that you have full reign of that. But the cue points are really cool. You have 8 per track that you can play with. The freeze functionality on this is really awesome because it turns the track into an instant sampler. So you can play any part, any slice or sample on this track by using the freeze functionality. It's basically a slicer. You also have a flux functionality. So if I go and hit like a cue point, it actually will, when I release it, it will take you back to the point that it was playing. So if I do go in here and hit freeze and come over here and play back this little part right here, it will actually pop back to where it's supposed to be in the track. So this is the flux functionality is available like on Serato, Traktor has it, so it's a known functionality in a lot of programs. Well, this has it as well. So those are really kind of your main, transport and loop and cutting features. The other big features that it has that I really enjoy is the effects. The effects panel on this is pretty awesome. You have a really nice XY pad on this that you can, you know, really do some cool stuff with the sound. It really adds a lot of color. You have these little drawers that you can pull down, and you have a pretty wide range of effects that you can select from. You can have 3 of them on deck at a time, but you can only use 1 at a time. That's a limitation. You can't use a combination of effects. You can only use 1 at a time. And I can tell you that that's probably because of a processor limitation thing with the iPad, because I will sometimes be running 2 effects at the same time and the app may freak out a little bit. So if you have a higher powered iPad, then you can definitely do way more at once. But yeah, running multiple effects and filters at the same time, that can freak the app out especially on an older iPad. Not so much on the newer iPads, but when I was on my iPad 3, oh man, the app would just stop if I was using a whole bunch of effects at one point. So, you know, like I said, my new iPad, never had a problem with it. But the effects panel is really awesome on this. You just open it up from both. You can open it up on both sides, and you can do effects to both tracks as you're mixing. It's really cool. You also have an EQ and a filter panel. So in this you have the equalizer tab and the filter tab. This is also where your track volume is over here. So if you don't have the Traktor Z1 mixer, then you can use the touch interface on the iPad. It works. You will, if you don't have the Z1, you'll have to get their little proprietary splitter that will run the master out of one and the headphone out of the other if you want cueing, which I highly suggest using cue points. Using headphone cues. Alright, anyway, that's really all the main features of the application there. This button is where you would go in and control your master volume, and you can turn on record. If you have that little splitter, this is where you would split the output. This is your music browser. So this will take you through all of your tracks. This pulls into your music application to where you have access to just individual songs, playlists, artists, albums, and genres. You can go directly to your playlist here, and then you also have recordings. So anytime you record, it'll keep a hold of the recording. You can come in here, edit, clean them out when don't have any use for them anymore. And then down here, this is something that's really kind of cool, because this will open up past sessions, so it does keep a history. So like, say if I played a set last week that was awesome, and I wanted to go back and replay that set, I can go back and it's like, okay, yeah, I played this on Sunday, alright, and I can go back and replay that set, and it'll pull up. Now, what Traktor does with its analytics and everything, it will pull up this recommended track section here. When you're just wanting to play an impromptu kind of set, I like to do a lot of improv with my mixes. I just like to go through and just choose tracks and just get it done. This is a great way to do it. You can go through and just pick out a lot of these recommended tracks. It usually sets them up by BPM and tries to keep it in key. It will kind of get off of key a little bit, but it does a really good job of recommending tracks that go together really well. It will be off a little bit, but that's where your own discernment comes into play. You can't just trust the computers, because then they win. We're still in control. Anyway, again, I digress. So it has a pretty good browser, but the lack of music selection and places that I can access music from is kind of a big downside to this application. So, but other than the lack of tracks, or music access, and the lack of pitch control for each track. This is a really awesome application. It's really fun to play with. You can use it with the S4 or the S2 controllers as well. So like the big Traktor controllers, it's really the S4 and the S2. You can't use it with the big one with the touchpads, the S8. You can't use it with the S8 or the S5 or anything like that. It's just the S2 and the S4, and the Z1 you can use with the iPad. So give it a shot, play with it, see if you like it. If not, then guess what? There's other DJ apps out there, and I'm going to be talking about more of them in the next videos. So I'll see you guys next time with my next video, which is going to be on DJ Player on the iPad. So you guys stay tuned for that. Anyway, as always, be cool, be real, abide, and always listen logically. Peace, guys.